The purpose of this video is to teach you the basics of using tables on your web page. It used to be that developers would use tables to design the layout of the page, and it was a way to kind of force the page to be laid out in somewhat of the way that we wanted it to look, but we actually couldn't force it to look exactly the way that we wanted to with tables. It was more of a hack than a legitimate means of formatting the page. Nowadays, a table is supposed to just be used for what a table would be used for, to show data. If we want to actually do formatting of the page, that should be done with CSS. Tables should never be used to format your page. They just strictly hold data. I created a new document called tablebasics.html, and I have copied in our basic document format from the template that I've created. If you have not created a template yet, I would suggest doing that. That would make it easier for each new page that you create to have this typical body layout. So what I have done is I created a new file called tablebasics.html, and I added a link to this page to my original index.html file, so that way I can get to table basics. And then I created a link up in the nav section on table basics to go back to home. So this is my standard layout. What we are going to do is we are going to start adding table elements so you can see what it looks like to add data to your page. A table is a tagged element. It has a beginning and a closing, and we start off by typing table, and we are going to end our table with table. Okay, so sometimes it's easier to see the content of your table across the screen, and sometimes it's easier to see it height-wise. So I'm going to show it to you two different ways just so you can see what it looks like. And then I'm going to show you the second way. It actually makes it easier for you to figure out what's going on in your page. So let's start with the first one. A table is made up of rows, and a row has a beginning and an ending. So TR is our table row. Alright, so I'm going to make a table that has two rows to it. Okay, and then within each row we're going to have table data, or TDs. And each TD has a beginning and an end. Okay, so what I'm going to say here is this is row 1, cell 1. And then I'm going to make a second one, which is row 1, cell 2. And actually we'll go ahead and make a third one here just so you can see what it looks like. And I want to show you why this gets kind of confusing to do it this way. So row 1, cell 3, and so forth. Okay, so what I have done is I created a row. So here's my row. There is a table data item. Here's an element on the page. Here is a second item and a third one. Okay, so now I also have another row here, and the catch is going to be that all of my rows have to have the same number of columns. It has to be that way. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make 3 table data elements in my second row here. So I'm going to have, this is row 2, cell 1, row 2, cell 2, and then row 2, cell 3. So once again, I have a table row. My table row has the first cell is cell 1, the next cell is cell 2, and the next one is cell 3. Okay, so if I save this and I refresh my page over here, I will see something that looks like this. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to add a border to the page the old-fashioned way before we actually get into the way that you should do it. Okay, so I'm going to say that my border is equal to 1 for my table, and then what that does for me is it puts a border around the table. Now this looks like something out of the 90s. We don't want to see this, but just for right now I want to show you what it's doing in a real quick manner. So like I said, we should not see this. We're going to use CSS in a few minutes to format this. Alright, the problem is I can look at this, I can say, okay, well here is row 1, so these two lines are made up of row 1. And so I go cell 1, cell 2, cell 3. Okay, then this is my second row, cell 1, cell 2, cell 3. And I can go straight across the page and I can see these, but it's not necessarily very easy to go back and edit them, especially if they start getting a large amount of data in the different cells. So the way that we should be doing this instead is by putting each TD on its own line and indenting them. Okay, so I'm going to take my TDs, and now I have 3 different TDs, and then my row is there. Okay, so I'll do the same thing here. Now this looks a little bit cleaner for me to go through and add data. It's the exact same thing, but remember, HTML ignores what's called white space. So it's going to ignore the fact that I have a whole bunch of white space from the beginning of the row to the beginning of the data item. It's going to ignore that. But what I get out of it is that I can look at this. Okay, this is the first row, and then this is the data that's contained in the first row. So here's cell 1, cell 2, cell 3. Here's my second row, and then going across cell 1, cell 2, cell 3. So these are my rows, and then these are my columns, and they're always going to be this way. So if I refresh this, you'll see I had the exact same thing before, plus my little fix of a typo that I had there. That is the basics of a table. Now my table right now has data in it, but I'm not really explaining what the data is for. I could make a paragraph before this table to add a little bit of information about what the table is referencing, or what I can do is right after my table declaration, I can create what's called a caption. As long as I can spell it right. Okay, so anyhow, I have this caption. I'm calling it my table, and when I refresh, my caption is now my table. And if you notice, it does align it centered above the table, and it's just simply there to describe what the data is that's in the table. One thing that I need to keep in mind when I am making a web page is what's called accessibility. And what I mean by that is there are certain people that will be browsing my website that may not be able to see. And if that's the case, they will use a piece of software called a screen reader. And what a screen reader does is it will go through the page and read each element that's on the page to the user. And one of the ways that we can make it easier on them is to put what is called a header row on my table. So I'm going to make another row. And my row is going to have, instead of TDs for table data, I'm going to make a TH. Okay, so this is heading 1, and that TH has a closing. TH, heading 2, and then TH, heading 3. Okay, so you'll notice 2 things that just happened. One, I created a heading, and it bolded all of those headings, and it also centered them. Now, what this will do is if somebody is using a screen reader, then what it's going to do is it's going to read through the page, and when they get to here, it will read heading 1, row 1, cell 1, heading 2, row 1, cell 2, heading 3, row 1, cell 3. And then when it gets to the next line, it says heading 1, row 2, cell 1. So if I'm doing something like trying to make a list of TV shows, or trying to make a list of weather or anything like that, it reads the heading to them so they know what the particular piece of information is referencing. It's not just simply some data in a page. Now, I said that a table has to have the same number of cells in each row, but there are ways around that. I want to make it where my first element that is in that second row actually takes up the first 2 columns. And what I mean by that is I want to see over here row 2, cell 1, but I want to see it take up both of these cell spaces. Maybe have some data that takes up both. And then I'm going to want to see this row 2, cell 3 still here. So the way that I'm going to do this is I want to get rid of this row 2, cell 2. And the problem is if I do that, I now only have 2 things in this second row, and I have 3 things in the first row and the heading row. Well, the problem is I can't do this. So what I have to do is I have to tell it that this particular TD element, this data element, has to span 2 columns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an attribute to my TD that says call span equals, and then however many columns I want this to span. How many columns do I want it to take up? I want to take up the space of 2 columns. Okay, so I'm going to take up the first one and the second one, and then my third element is going to still be in the same spot. So I'm going to save this, refresh, and now I'll see that row 2 cell 1 takes up both of these locations, but row 2 cell 3 is still in the same place. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Put back my second row, put this back the way it was before. Okay, there are other ways that I can do it. That, let's say I want row 1 cell 1 to actually take up both of these columns. I want it to go up and down. I can also row span. So I'm going to take and get rid of row 2 cell 1 because I don't want that. And what I want is row 1 cell 1 to span those 2 rows. So I'm going to add an attribute to row 1 cell 1's TD. And this time, instead of being a call span for column span, I want to do row span equals 2. And then if I come over here and refresh, now row 1 cell 1 takes up both of those rows. Now I have to account for every single cell. So if I want a particular cell to take up 2 cells, I have to either call span or row span it. I have to account for it. So what that means is that if my first row has 3 elements on it, so 3 columns, then every row after that has to have 3 columns. So for every single row afterwards, I would have to account for anything that takes up more than 1 cell space. Okay, so I reset my table and I want to show to you some accessibility features. What I want to do is I want to make this a listing of TV shows. So I changed my caption to show listings. And what I want to see across the top here is heading 1 is going to be blank. It's going to be nothing. This will be channel 1 and this will be channel 2. And then down the side I want to see show 1 and show 2 and find out what times they're playing. Okay, so heading 1, I want that to be blank, but I can't just leave it blank. I have to put something there. So the thing that I'm going to use is a non-breaking space. And remember, a non-breaking space is an ampersand NBSP for non-breaking space and then a colon. Okay, this isn't heading 2 anymore. This is now channel 1. This is not heading 3, this is channel 2. And then row 1, cell 1 is going to be show 1. And then row 2, cell 1 is going to be show 2. So you'll see something that looks like this. Alright, so now row 1, cell 2 is going to be the time when that show plays for channel 1. Okay, so that is playing at 5:30 p.m. And the second channel is playing it at 8:45 p.m. Okay, so then the next one, show 2, channel 1 is going to play this at 3:30 p.m. and channel 2 is going to play it at 11 p.m. Okay, so here's the thing is if somebody has a screen reader, the way that the screen reader will actually read this to the user is show listings blank, channel 1, channel 2, show 1, 5:30 p.m., 8:45 p.m., show 2, 3:30 p.m., 11 p.m. And we don't want that to happen because they're not going to know what those times mean. So I want to somehow make this where the screen reader understands that certain things are headings and then will repeat it for people. Okay, so what I want it to do is I want the system to say to the person, channel 1, show 1, 5:30 p.m. Channel 2, show 1, 8:45 p.m. Channel 1, show 2, 3:30 p.m. Channel 2, show 2, 11 p.m. That's the way I want a screen reader to read it. Okay, so the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to give my headers some IDs. Okay, so what I'm going to say is that my channel 1 TH is ID equals channel 1. And then my second channel TH, its ID is channel 2. Okay, so now by itself that doesn't do anything, but what happens now is my times, I want to state what channel they belong to. Okay, so what I'm going to say is that this 5:30 belongs to this headers called channel 1. And this one belongs to headers equals channel 2. Okay, so now this one here, the 3:30 p.m., that belongs to headers equals channel 1. And this one here belongs to headers equals channel 2. So now what happens is my page doesn't look any different, but behind the scenes when a screen reader looks at the page, now it will do what I want. Channel 1, show 1, 5:30 p.m. Channel 2, show 1, 8:45 p.m. and so forth. It makes it where somebody that can't actually read your page is able to figure out what time the show is playing without having to have somebody come and decipher it for them. The screen reader will do that automatically. There is a quicker way to do this that became available in HTML5, and instead of specifically stating the ID for the headers and then specifying my headers attribute for each individual TD, what I can do is specify the scope of a header. Okay, so I'm going to undo these. I'm going to put this back the way it was. And now what I'm going to do is instead, in my TH statement, I'm going to say scope equals the entire column. And now what I'm telling it is that this particular heading here belongs to this entire column, all the stuff that's straight up and down. So that's the heading for it. And then I'm going to do the same thing for channel 2. So scope equals call for column. And what you'll notice is that this is much easier on me as the developer. Now the problem is a lot of the older screen readers don't necessarily understand this. So what I'm doing by doing it this way is I get the new feature of it being shorter on me. I get to know that it will work great with new screen readers, but somebody that has an old screen reader may or may not still be able to understand what's in my table. So while this is actually shorter, you're better off using the ID in the headers. Alright, so I told you before that the border, I don't really want to define the border here. That was just simply so you could see over here where the tables belong, or the cells belong inside of the table. The thing is that when I do this here, I'm using the old style. This is actually deprecated. We should not be doing it this way. Instead, what I want to do is delete it from here. And I want to either set a style here or set a style up in my header. And so I'm going to do that up in my head section. I'm going to make a style. And I want to define everything for the style for my tables in this section instead of down at the actual table. If I do the style here, then it will apply to every table, every TD, every TH. But if I do it down below, I would have to manually specify at each individual TD or TH, and I really don't want to have to do that. So I'm going to do it up here in the head. Alright, so by removing the border, what I've actually done is I've now put it in this layout, which is still in a table format. I just don't see the border. And what I want to do is I want to turn the border back on, and I want to manipulate this a little bit. So I would like for my table to be centered. I would like for the table to have a 1 pixel border around it. I'd like to have it have a certain width and so forth. So I'm going to declare that up here. I'm going to say table. And what do I want to declare for the table goes inside of here. So the first thing is I'm going to say its margin is going to be auto. Now what this will do is just by doing margin, it's the same as me doing margin left and margin right and setting both of those to auto. It will center my table. Okay, so now the next thing I want to do is I want to set the border around the table to 1 pixel solid black. And remember, we typically don't want to use absolute colors. I typically want to specify the hex value, but for the purpose of this video I'm going to use just black. And this table is going to have a specific width, and its width is going to be 600 pixels. And there we go. So now what I have is a table that is centered on the page. It has a width, and it has a 1 pixel solid black border. Now you notice though, the border is just strictly around the table itself. It is not around each individual cell. So I'll show you how to fix that in just a minute. Okay, so this table is a little wide. We'll make it a little bit skinnier. Okay, that might be a little bit better. All right, so some other things that I want to set are going to be applied to my THs and my TDs. Okay, now I want those both to be formatted the same, and things such as the border and their padding and stuff like that. So if I want to apply a style to more than one element, I can list both elements here. So I'm going to do TD, comma, TH. And what I'm telling it is, hey, if you see any TDs or any THs, use this style. It'd be the same as me specifying these separately. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm also going to specify that these have a border of 1px solid black. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I want to apply a little bit of padding because I want to move this away from the border a little, or from the edge a little bit. So I'm going to say padding is 5 pixels. And I don't necessarily like the font family being Times New Roman in here, so I'm going to say font family is Arial. And remember, we always have a fallback one. I want another sans serif font, so I'm going to say sans serif. And now if I do this, refresh. Okay, now I do notice one thing is I forgot to capitalize the A for Arial. It is a proper noun, therefore it should be capitalized. Okay, so what you'll notice though is it looks like it did before. I have these two different borders, and the thing is that my my border, I want to make that one solid pixel, and we'll get to that in just a minute on how to do it. But some other things that I want to play with are going to be my caption here. I can make it where my caption is a certain font, and I also want to play with being able to do what's called a alternate rows for what's called banded rows. Actually, what that does is makes every other line a specific color. Okay, so I also want my caption to be a specific font, so I'm going to say font family is going to be Arial and sans serif if I don't have Arial installed, and its font weight is going to be bold. And then now if I refresh, now it's bolder, it's Arial. Channel 1, Channel 2 are still both headings, so they're still both bolded. That's going to be because they're THs. Now if I wanted to, I could specify that they are not to be bolded or that they should be bolded. I can specify both of those right in my, my CSS statements. So just to have some extra rows, I copied and pasted those first two rows so that we have 6 of them. And what I want to do is I want to play with what is called banding, or what is also known as a structural pseudo class. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to make it where every other row that's in here is colored a certain way. And I could do every other row, every 3 rows, every 6 rows, the first row, the last row. I could specify those. And the way that I do it is using a pseudo class. It's going to be for the TR. What kind of TR? Well, it's going to be the nth of type. And then in parentheses, how many do I want to do? So if I want to do every third one, I'd put a 3. If I want to do every 5th row, I'd put it as a 5. But in this case, I want to play with odd and even rows. Okay, so if I do odd rows, then what I can do is I can specify the background color for the different rows. So I'm going to say background color is almost white. So white is FFFFFF, so I'm going to say all C's. So that way it's almost white, it's a really light gray, but now what I can see is that every other row is specified as being a gray. Okay, I could do other things like I want to specify that the first row is supposed to be blue. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to even, and we'll make this a little bit lighter, so we'll go more like all these, and then, alright, so it's just a touch lighter. Alright, so if you notice the first row is not touched, but what I want to play with is in that first row, I'm going to make a pseudo class for first of type. And what do I want to set for this first of type? Alright, my first of type is going to be background color. And I want to make it a bluish color, so 000066. Remember, it's the first 2 are red, the next 2 are green, the last 2 are blue. And then I'm also going to change the color of the font because that's going to be a kind of dark blue and we won't be able to read the black text on there. So we're going to make it EA. And there we go. Okay, so now it's a table that looks a little bit better, but I want to show you a problem. The problem is that the CSS elements get applied in the order that they are actually specified in the document. Okay, so what it does is it goes down and says, okay, we'll take that first row and make it blue. And if I change this one down here to odd, watch what happens. Notice the first row is now gray. The reason for it is it came down through the page and said, okay, well, let's change it to blue. It changed it to blue. It really did it. But then on the next line, it also says the odd rows, which that's number 1, we'll change it to this color. So even though I specified that I wanted that first row to be blue, the order of these items in the list of CSS elements also makes a difference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my first of type and move it after my nth of type. And now when I come over here and refresh, I'll see that this works, because what it does is it applies the odd values first, so that first row gets colored. Then it comes down, it says first of type should be blue, and then it goes back and colors it blue. It really will get all of the styles, they get applied in order though. So it did turn gray, then it turned it blue. We just don't see it because it happens really fast. The last thing that I want to play with is I want to structure my table a little bit better. My table has 3 distinct parts. It has a table heading, it has a table body, and then it has the table footer. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here and before the first row, before the actual table row, I want to specify that this section is my table head. Okay, so then I'm going to come after that section and close that is the table head. Okay, and then the body of my document starts here, so I'm going to say T body, and then come down after the last show listing here, and we're going to close the T body. The last section that we have is what's called a T foot, so my table footer, and that one goes down here. Now the purpose of a T-foot really is things like if I have a table that has our sales for particular quarters for all of the products that we sell, we could do things like totals. And then what we can do is we can actually format that row differently just by calling it by a T-foot. So in this case, maybe I need to see how many times a show actually plays. Well, then what I could do is I could make another row that has that information in it. So I'm going to make a TR. Okay, my TR has TDs for data, and the first TD is going to be blank. So it's a non-breaking space, and we'll close it. The next one is going to be the number of shows that actually played. So in this case, it was 6. And let's say that a couple of these shows actually didn't go through. Maybe this last showing here didn't actually occur. So then that other station only showed 5 shows. And just so you can see what happens here. Alright, so now what happens is I have specified that my my TRs are formatted a certain way. Remember I said the first of type. And by doing the first of type for the TRs within the T head get styled. The first of type of my TDs or my TR in the body get formatted, and then my footer first of type TR get formatted. So I want to go ahead and fix those. Now to fix those, the way that I'm going to do that is I actually have to fix it within my CSS. Okay, so what happens is now I have my TRs, and what I'm doing is I'm specifying that TRs in every section of my document are formatted a certain way. And I don't want them to be within the entire document. I want it to be just simply within the T head. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to say I'm sorry, not T head, but T body space. So within the T body, wherever you see a TR that is an odd nth of type, do this. And then in here, instead of being all of the document, I want this to be my T head. So this is the T head's TR first of type. And then now we get something that looks like this. Okay, so then the last thing I want to do is for my T foot. Okay, now my T foot, what in the T foot am I actually going to apply this to? To the TR. And in this one, I'm going to say the color is maybe a greenish color. So we'll say, I'm sorry, this isn't color, it's background color. Okay, so now we get something like that. And once again, I can't read the text, so I also need to change the color of the font. So I'm going to change it to be something like almost white. And there we go. So now what I've done is I've specified that only in the T body section are we doing the nth of type. Only in the head section are we doing the first of type, and in the T foot section, all the TRs. And I have the ability to do this. I can either do a pseudo class within a section, or I can do a full class within a particular section. The last thing that I want to do is I want to get rid of this 90s look, and I want to make it look more recent. And to do this, our current tables we usually see as being just one single pixel of a border between these. The problem is right now our table has a border around it, and each TD has a border around it, and then there's also a 1 pixel margin on the outside of every one of those. So what happens is we actually see 2 pixels worth of white between each TD and the table row. Alright, so I want to fix that. I want to make it where I don't see that. And the way that I do that is playing with what's called a border collapse. Now this is going to be under the table section. I want to add a border dash collapse. And my border collapse is going to be set to a value of collapse. Now what this does is this gets rid of this little border, and essentially what it does is it gets rid of the space between the table and the TD borders and puts them on top of each other. So if I save that and refresh, now I get something that looks like this. So what you've learned in this lesson is how to make a table, that a table is not 4-page layout, how to use the table head, the table body, and the table footer, how to do row span and call span, how to format them using CSS, and then also how to use the structural pseudo classes.